Now, Lord, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight. You are my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Our subject today is walking through the wilderness. Isaiah chapter 43, verses 18 and 19, the Bible says, "Remember ye not the former things, neither consider the things of old. Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall ye not know it? I will even make a way in the wilderness, and rivers in the desert." That same chapter, verses 1 through 3, the first part of verse 3 say, "But now thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not. For I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou walkest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. For I am the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, thy Savior." Walking through the wilderness. Third chapter of Matthew's Gospel speaks concerning the appearance of a rather unique character. Character who came on the scene with a flaming and frightening message. There was no specific date attached to his dramatic appearance. The record just says it happened in those days. It came about in the intertestamental period, when accumulated corruption had silenced all the Old Testament voices. when communication between heaven and earth had broken down, when the prophets were silent and the vision had vanished and the dream had faded away, when it seemed that every effort to reach man in his fallen state had failed and come to naught, God planned a new thrust. A strange character broke the silence of 4 centuries with the announcement of the coming Messiah. When asked of his identity and his credentials, he replied, "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness. My name is not as important as my message. The one who comes after me is mightier than I, but my mission is to create a climate for him. I've been commissioned to blaze a trail in the wilderness where his holy feet may trod." John's wilderness crusade must have been shocking and embarrassing to his priestly father. After all, he was established in the community. Zacharias, no doubt, expected his son to succeed him in the priesthood. But John had no interest in the priesthood and its ceremonies and formalities. We could conjecture that John rebelled at being an altar boy. I imagine his father felt as if he was losing his son. Can you see Zacharias and Elizabeth agonizing over their son being caught up in this weird behavior, living by himself like a hermit, dressed in camel hair and eating wild honey and locusts? Now folk were leading the temple service to go out to this wilderness crusade. I imagine the chief priests and leaders pressed Zacharias to control and constrain his son's wild rambling about the coming Messiah. But John was captive to a call to the wilderness, and his father couldn't have restrained him or silenced him even if he wanted to. The wilderness of John's sojourn was reflective of the society which surrounded it. For when the poor are oppressed and exploited, one is walking in the wilderness. When there is corruption and hypocrisy in leadership, be it laity or ecclesiastic, there is a walking in the wilderness. When sin boldly and brazenly stalks the land, one is walking in the wilderness. Well, I submit to you today that based on the preceding criteria, we are walking in the wilderness. Today's wilderness is fashionable and fabulous. The modern wilderness is extremely attractive with glaring lights and fascinating entertainment. The wilderness is financed by billions of dollars and protected by privilege. For those who have, denying affirmative action to those left out, shut out, and locked out. In the wilderness, pimps and prostitutes walk the streets brazenly and defiantly without shame or fear. In the wilderness, illegal drugs and narcotics have become so common that almost nobody notices it unless and until they show up in a major way in areas where black and brown people don't live. The captains of industry who finance and control the wilderness try their utmost to block, undermine, and break labor unions, do away with the regulations that safeguard the health, safety, and welfare of their workers. They oppress the poor, underprivileged, underpaid, exploited, ghettoized, untrained, and do their utmost to keep them in that state. And while they talk about leaving no child behind, they talk about creating jobs and retraining and retooling, they cut off all the funding to the very programs that will fulfill their lofty rhetoric in order to give money hand over fist in the form of tax cuts to folk who already have more money than they know what to do with, and clout to get their children into Ivy League universities, whether the child's GPA merits it or not. In the wilderness, the concept of liberty and justice for all isn't applicable to folk with the wrong color scheme. Black and brown men in the wilderness, if well-dressed and driving a nice car, are suspected of having semi-illegal source of income. If they're sagging and wearing a hoodie, they're suspected of being gangsters. They can expect to be beat down, shot down, or arrested after being terrorized for offenses that would merit only a ticket or a summons and would have only resulted in a ticket or a summons if their skin was a different shade. It has been proven again and again and again that any white man, law officer or not, can gun down a man of color in this wilderness as long as he claims he was in fear for his life. It matters not whether the victim is fearfully armed to the teeth 17-year-old, wielding a bag of Skittles and a can of iced tea? Or a little boy, 12 years old with a toy pistol? Totally unarmed 18-year-old, or completely unarmed middle-aged man, choked to death in New York City? 18-year-old who played his music too loud and was, by the way, totally unarmed. My friend Terrence Crutcher in Tulsa, Oklahoma, tended my church on a regular basis. Gunned down, shot in the back with his hands in the air. The wilderness is even more disturbing and distressful when Uncle Toms like Clarence Thomas and Ben Carson buy in to the racist drivel dripping from the lips of the extreme right wing of their party. According to their ridiculous revisionist history, Black and Hispanic people are happy and content for 150 years. It was only when Obama became president promising something for nothing that all this unrest has come about. After all, Obama was the greatest welfare president of all time, according to Gingrich and Limbaugh, Beck and Hannity, Levine, and our two major resident Uncle Toms. Real history points to Ronald Reagan as the greatest welfare president of all time. He just played Robin Hood in reverse. He stuck up and stuck it to the poor and gave it to the rich. Financial disaster President Obama rescued us from, in spite of being thwarted and blocked and stonewalled by the Republicans at every turn, even when he offered solutions out of their own conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, was a direct result of Reagan's Robin Hood in reverse policies perpetuated by the Bushes. The violence in Ferguson wasn't instigated by the protesters. They were peaceful until provoked by policemen, not armed in riot gear, but in military battle dress, automatic rifles, machine guns, pointing at women, children, and babies. While they were protected in armored personnel carriers and tanks. There's a reason for the unrest that we have now. There's a reason for the united protest that we see. Because even white America has had enough. The vivid, unforgettable murder in cold blood that we saw of a policeman with his knee in a man's neck for almost 9 minutes until he died, calling on his mother, has changed the outlook of even some of the most hardened people in this country. It's time for a change. Revisionist history is amazing. It wasn't wild, angry mobs of black people who firebombed buses just because folk wanted to sit anywhere they wanted to when traveling. It wasn't angry mobs of black people who were so violent that the National Guard had to be federalized by the president so that instead of blocking the integration of public schools, they enforced it. It wasn't angry mobs of black people that set fire to and blew up churches that held rallies to encourage people to vote. Black people didn't hang themselves from trees all over the South for heinous crimes like refusing to get off the sidewalk and let a white man pass, or looking, quote, the wrong way at a white woman, or attempting to open a school to educate their own people, or encourage their people to become active in the political process. It wasn't mobs of black people who packed picnic baskets and made family and community outings of lynchings. It wasn't mobs of black people who clapped and cheered while black men's bodies were riddled with bullets, their genitals cut off and stuffed in their mouths. Bodies were set on fire. The people who founded this nation weren't black, and they didn't use peaceful, nonviolent methods. It wasn't black folk who beat down the tax collectors and stripped them naked, poured hot tar on them, rolled them in feathers, and rode them out of town on fence posts. It wasn't black folk who burned down the print shops and destroyed the printing presses that issued the stamps for the king's taxes. It wasn't black folk who, with total disregard for the sacredness of private property, poured millions of dollars of tea into Boston Harbor. It wasn't black folk who pelted the soldiers sent to restore order after the rioting with bricks and bottles and cried massacre when the soldiers opened fire to defend themselves. This nation was built on disorder. It was built on rioting and unrest. It's only justified when well-to-do rich white folk feel wrong and violated, rebel. It's only abhorrent when folk who ain't rich or white feel wrong, abused, and oppressed rebel. I say a revisionist history is amazing. They've been lying so long that blatant wrong has become right, and obvious right has become wrong. Revisionist history says that Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, William B. Travis were heroes who died courageously battling the civil and oppressive Mexicans who had denied them of their liberty. The truth is that the Mexicans had abolished slavery. Their oppression was the looming loss of their property, their slaves. Every time I watch the Alamo, I cheer for the Mexicans. They were the ones fighting for me. And by the way, Davy Crockett didn't die valiantly, swinging his musket and knocking out Mexicans left and right until he was overwhelmed. Mexican records show that Crockett surrendered with several others. They didn't all die fighting to the death to the last man. They were lined up against the wall and executed for the rebels that they were. Revisionist history. The most unjust war this nation ever fought was the Mexican-American War. History books used to universally say that it was our manifest destiny to control the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Some went so far as to say it was God's will. The truth of the matter is, there was a very delicate balance in Congress between slave-owning states and free states. And the only way the country was, and the way that the country was growing, the free states would soon outgrow the slave states. And the slave states were ever fearful of losing control of Congress, because if the free states gained control of the South, way of life would be in jeopardy. This tension existed from the foundation of the nation. The 3/5 stipulation insisted on by the southern states was to maintain a balance of power in Congress between the slave states and the free states in the House of Representatives. The free states were more densely populated by whites than the slave states. Because most of the work in the southern states was accomplished by slave labor, black folk were the majority, but couldn't be counted in the representation process because they were property. Hence the 3/5 of a man rule. This helped for a time to maintain the balance, but the tide was turning. More land was needed to open more territory for the development of slave states. Did you know that the vast majority of the presidents before Lincoln were from the southern slaveholding states? Naturally, they did all they could to promote, protect, and proliferate the institution of slavery. So we bullied the Mexicans into surrendering over half of their nation territory to us, and now have the nerve to want to deport 12 million of them who just came back home. We have to protect our border. Seriously? From Texas to California is their land. Then we gangstered from them. Revisionist history. The greatest act of lawlessness this nation ever saw was instigated, led, and perpetuated by the class of rich white southern landowners who instigated the Texas Rebellion, the Mexican-American War, and bloodshed and massacres in Kansas that led to the Civil War itself. Revisionist history says that these southern patriots were fighting for their liberty, their land, their property, and their sacred honor. The truth is that their liberty was at the expense of my liberty, and your liberty if your skin is dark. We were their property, and there is no honor in holding millions of fellow humans in cruel and abject bondage. When their 5-year-old riot was crushed They refused to accept the result. It was intolerable for them to see black men voting, holding public office, sitting in the state and national legislature. So a former Confederate cavalry general by the name of General Nathan Bedford Forrest formed a secret society, the Ku Klux Klan, to turn back the clock and put the freedmen back in their place. All over the South, ex-Confederate officers and politicians used terrorism, violence, brutality to nullify the 13th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. Laws were enacted that made it almost impossible for a man to vote. From reciting the preamble of the Constitution, word for word, to counting the number of gumballs in a jar without opening it. Poll tax was instituted to block black voters, but it caught up with the poor states, with the poor whites too. So the grandfather clause was invented, which said that if your grandfather could vote, then you could vote. Jim Crow was instituted. Black codes, where black folk were relegated to menial jobs. If they didn't work the jobs that they were told to work, they could be arrested for loitering, sent to the chain gang, or sent to plantations. Between 1866 and 1964, 4,000 lynchings were reported or recorded. Heaven knows how many thousands more weren't. All in an effort to keep black people enslaved. During this period of time, 5, count them 5 of the sitting U.S. presidents were card-carrying members of the Ku Klux Klan. William McKinley, a Republican, former Union officer who felt that blacks had been given too much and that they were giving them the vote was irresponsible. Woodrow Wilson, a virulent racist who helped Klan membership skyrocket when he provided screenings of the Klansmen and Birth of a Nation to his cabinet, Congress, and the Supreme Court. Wilson's ideology was the foundation upon which racist Southern leaders, Strom Thurmond, George Wallace, built the Dixiecrat Party. The Dixiecrat Party was hard, right, Southern Democrats who were bound and determined to see segregation never ending. Their motto was segregation yesterday, segregation today, segregation forever. When President Kennedy, President Johnson instituted the civil rights reforms, these Dixiecrats left the Democratic Party, and when Nixon became president, with his law and order theme, they joined the Republican Party and are the basis and backbone of the Republican Party even today. Law and order presidents sound familiar, doesn't it? It was under Wilson's leadership that Washington, D.C. fell under Jim Crow laws. Wilson boldly proclaimed the benefits of segregation. Warren G. Harding was actually sworn into the KKK at a ceremony held at the White House by the imperial wizard of the Klan. Calvin Coolidge allowed cross burnings on the Capitol steps and officially reviewed the massive Klan rallies and parades of 1925 and 1926 when 40,000 Klansmen marched through Washington, D.C., down Pennsylvania Avenue. Harry S. Truman was the last U.S. president, to our knowledge, with ties to the Klan. By the time he was president, he and the Klan had parted ways over his support of Catholics in key political positions and the desegregation of the military. This nation is divided for a reason. It will never fully heal because the cancer of racism is so deeply embedded into the core. 400 years is embedded in the core and fiber of the nation. The Old South never has and never will give up. The Confederacy grew out of the Democratic Party before the Civil War. After the Civil War, black folk naturally voted Republican. Republicans freed them, gave them citizenship, the right to vote. Southerners went back to the Democrats until FDR. Blacks who could vote always voted Republican. Southern whites and others who held their views voted Democratic. But when FDR, when Roosevelt and Truman, and later Kennedy and Johnson began to reverse the discrimination and treat blacks fairly, the states of the old Confederacy, the Solid South, formed the Dixiecrat Party, whose platform was Jim Crow. Richard Nixon began the Republican trend of race baiting to woo the Old South into voting Republican by vowing to be the law and order president. Ronald Reagan took it to another level with his talk of welfare queens and reverse discrimination in his mostly successful attempt to overturn affirmative action. Reagan sent an unmistakably clear message when he paid an official presidential visit to Bob Jones University, a university historically notorious for its racist and segregationist policies and practices. He made it a point to snub the NAACP. He told the world he wasn't being racist, he was just being fair and balanced. Sound familiar? That same formula was followed by the Bushes. And the ideology is being carried out by the Tea Party, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, Michelle Bachmann, Senator Cruz, our two resident Uncle Toms, Ben Carson, Clarence Thomas, and broadcast daily on Fox News. They hated President Obama because he put to the lie all the dearly held myths about black men. He was not and is not a criminal. No matter how hard they tried to manufacture something, anything, he wasn't a gangster. He didn't have baby mamas all over creation. He only been married one time to one wife. He and she were Harvard graduated and educated lawyers. He was the president of the Harvard Law Review. Do you know how smart, how utterly brilliant you have to be to hold that position? And they couldn't stand it. They tried to undermine him in nearly every way possible, from questioning his birth certificate to disrespecting him from the floor during the State of the Union, to disrespecting his wife and children in an effort to get him into some stereotypical outbursts that would validate them saying, see there, we knew all along he was just another enemy. But the president was cool as the other side of the pillow, and they couldn't touch him. So they've enacted laws across the country, taking it out on the rest of us. New voter registration laws that make it difficult as possible for black and brown people to vote. When the ID laws affected poor whites as well, then they made hunting and fishing licenses a legal form or valid form of ID. Then they shut down the license offices in the black and brown populated areas, moved them away, far away, and had the hours changed so that they would be closed before people could get to them after work. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Isn't it curious that nearly all the legal concealed weapon states are in the old Confederacy? Is it a coincidence that stand your ground laws are on the books of these same states? Isn't it strange that only white folk get to stand their ground? Trayvon Martin was being stalked by a stranger. And when he tried to defend himself, He was shot dead in cold blood. Black woman in the same state who was being harassed and physically beat down by her husband, shot her gun in the air and was arrested and is serving 20 years. White men in Colorado, Arizona, New York, armed to the teeth, who actually shot at policemen, taken prisoner, stand trial. Michael Brown, no weapon, shot 6 times, no indictment. Brother in New York strangled to death over selling cigarettes on the street, no indictment, no weapon. Mr. Scott in South Carolina, shot in the back 6 times, no weapon. My friend Terrence Crusher, shot in the back with his hands in the air, raised over his head, no weapon. Mr. Floyd, no weapon. Strangled to death with a knee in his neck. Our sister in Louisville, gunned down in her own house, in her own bed. How long ago? How long? Since we all have to journey through this wilderness, it is imperative that we train and equip our young people to handle the wilderness. They must be taught responsibility and discipline, to stick to and complete a task, to take pride in doing the job right, not to expect something for nothing, to refuse to float through life being Captain Screw-Up. We're not traveling aimlessly through the wilderness. We're not wandering in circles to no purpose. We have to take seriously our education, take seriously our civic responsibility. We can't just show up to vote for president. We have to vote for county commissioner. We have to vote for city councilmen. We have to vote for the mayors. We have to vote for the judges. We have to vote for district attorneys. That's how things get changed. We have to go out and vote. Somebody died for you to have that opportunity. Somebody died so you could have the privilege. Shame on you if you don't go to vote. We're in the process of crossing the Jordan. We're in preparation to receive our inheritance when we cross over to the promised land. Sometimes that preparation entails enduring the discipline of the desert. In our wilderness wandering, we will inevitably face situations and circumstances that will either make us or break us. When you face those situations, all God is waiting for is for you to grab him like Jacob did and say, I will not let you go until you bless me. Oh yes, we must face the discipline of the desert. Moses, Elijah, Jesus each faced the discipline of the desert. Moses had 40 years of the wrong training in Egypt, but God had to deprogram him and then reprogram him. Elijah learned faith and trust at a wilderness brook and a desolate mountain cave. Jesus went through 3 rounds in the wilderness with the devil himself before knocking him down in the 3rd round with "It is written." Learn well the lessons of the wilderness, but don't get caught up in the wilderness. There is a danger of getting caught up in the brush and the briars of the wilderness. There is danger of losing the trail toward the promised land. Many good and well-meaning people with talent and gift and promise, potential, are hopelessly hung up in the thicket, tangled up in the brambles and the briars. There is danger of becoming satisfied and content with wilderness living. You must not accept the wilderness as your permanent home. You must have a sustained discontent with the wilderness. The church is an oasis in the wilderness. And while we may enjoy the oasis, while we may shout at the oasis, it's not our permanent camp. The promised land still looms before us. The oasis is where tired, wounded, footsore travelers find a haven, a place with some cooling water from Jesus' well. But when we've got on to push and push and push on through, for the wilderness is the only route to the promised land. There may be fears and frustration along the way. We may face handicaps and horrors as we journey. The wilderness can be frightening, depressing, and sometimes frustrating. But God speaks loud and clear as we travel through. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will comfort you. I will deliver you. You got to put your faith in the Lord. I, the Lord thy God, will hold thy right hand, saying unto thee, fear not, I will help thee. Moses was God's deliverer for his day. Elijah was God's drum major for righteousness and revival for his day. John was God's fire bell in the night for his day. God is counting on us today. He is depending on each one of us to cry loud and spare not. Repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. The Lord is coming. Are you ready? The Lord is coming. Are you ready? Would your heart beat right if it came tonight? The Lord is coming. Are you ready? Well, I can't speak for you, but I'm going to a place where the wicked shall cease from trouble, and the weary shall be at rest. I'm going to a place where the lion shall lay down with the lamb, and a little child shall lead them. Do you want to go? Well, I'm going to a place where the tree of life is still growing, and the river of life is still flowing. I'm going to a place where the golden streets will never need polishing, the pearly gates will never need oil, and the great white throne will never need dusting. Do you want to go? Then call Jesus. Turn right and go straight, because Jesus is the way. Jesus is the way. Jesus is the way home. And when you get there, guess what Jesus will ask you? Tell me, how did you feel when you come out the wilderness? Your way out of the wilderness is through the cross. Jesus died to provide you a way out. He asked the question. There are two ways in front of you, life and death. Choose life. Why will you die? God bless you today. We want to thank you for spending this time with us. And we ask that if you were impressed to give your heart to Jesus, that you would at your earliest convenience send a note to the following address: Ephesus SDA Church, P.O. Box 201, 119, San Antonio, Texas. You may return your tithe and offering to www.adventistgiving.org, or you can mail it to the address that we just gave you, which is Ephesus SDA Church, P.O. Box 201, 119, San Antonio, Texas, 78220. Again, may God richly bless you. We'll see you next week. Be looking on your email, your telephone line. There will be a prayer line beginning this Wednesday that you can call in and we'll all pray together. God bless you until next week.